To be talking about the weapons of the Stone Age. The Stone Age is a period that encompasses the majority of human history. It started 2.6 million years ago and only ended around 5,000 years ago with the emergence of metallurgy. This period saw a wide array of weapons being made of stone, wood, bone, and more. First, let's talk about the most common weapon or tool of the Stone Age, the hand axe. The oldest hand axes date all the way back to around 2.6 million years ago. These are called the Oldowan hand axes. Their design was pretty simple. It consisted of a rock with only a few flakes chipped off of it. This created a sharp edge. These axes were used for a large variety of things, chopping up food, crafting tools, and even as weapons. They were not primarily used as weapons, but it can be assumed on many occasions they were. A heavy, sharp rock in the hands of a man, or in this case an Australopithecine, is inherently a weapon. You could imagine many clashes which saw a hand axe being used to bludgeon an opponent. These tools could have also been used to ward off hungry predators. Hand axe technology would advance significantly over the next 2 million years. Eventually, with improved tool-making techniques, they became beautiful works of art. The hand axes at Boxgrove, England are symmetrical and show relatively advanced tool-making techniques. These more modern axes were sharper and certainly capable of causing damage. You would definitely not want to run into an angry Middle Pleistocene hominin with an Acheulean hand axe.
Nope.
Besides rocks crafted into tools, plain old rocks were obviously used as weapons. It is only natural to grab a big rock and either throw it or smash it over someone's head. It is safe to say that rocks are some of the first weapons. Sticks could also be a candidate. An unsharpened stick or log could effectively be used as a club. Even chimpanzees are sometimes seen using large sticks to hit their friends. A large bone could function in a similar way. Sharpened or naturally pointed sticks could have functioned as primitive spears. Spears are used by chimpanzees and sometimes even orangutans. To make a spear, chimps simply break off a branch and bite the tip to make it sharp. They often use these weapons to spear monkeys and other small mammals. Our ancestors were likely capable of this behavior. Very simple spears were probably being used before our last common ancestor with chimps. More complex spears consisting of strong shafts and sharpened tips would have taken longer to develop. Since wood does not typically preserve well in the fossil record, we do not really know when the first complex spears were made. Some of the oldest direct evidence of wooden spears comes from Schöningen, Germany. Here, multiple spears were found. They are around 330,000 years old and have miraculously survived all those years, albeit fossilized. The spears vary from 1.84 to 2.53 meters or 6 to 8.3 feet in length. Just like today's tournament javelins, the center of gravity is located in the front third of the shaft for some of the spears. In addition, most of the spears taper in an aerodynamic way except for Spear 6. Experimental research using experienced athletes to throw replicas of Spear 2 show that the spears are capable of being thrown at distances of at least 15 to 20 meters and are similar in weight and balance to javelins. However, Spear 6, which does not taper at the back and also has a natural kink, is interpreted as a thrusting spear. Together, the evidence suggests that the Schöningen spears were crafted in specific ways for specific uses. This is some of the earliest direct evidence of spears. The oldest direct evidence comes from the 400,000-year-old Clacton spear tip. The temporal and geographic distribution of these artifacts tell us that this technology was widespread. Unfortunately, since wood preserves so poorly in the fossil record, we do not know how old this technology could be. I would venture to say that thrusting spears of this complexity may have been used since the time of Homo erectus or even earlier. A significant advancement that would make spears truly formidable weapons was the addition of a stone tip. It was recently discovered that as far back as 500,000 years ago, humans were hafting stone tips to their spears. Points from Cathupan 1, South Africa, might be the oldest evidence of hafting in the world. These points are shaped in a way that would have made them efficient spears. When put under a microscope, their purpose is clear. The concentration of damage is pronounced at the tip of the spear, while the edges have much less wear. Comparing this evidence to experimental studies tells researchers all they need to know to confidently say that these points were hafted and used as spears. Attaching stone points to spears is a very important technological advancement. Stones are much harder and sharper than wood could ever be. They are able to shatter bone and cut through flesh much more effectively. Wood by nature has a lot of friction and often lacks the mass needed to penetrate large animals. This advancement is certainly one of the most important of all time. I believe people often overlook how deadly a man with a spear is compared to any other predator. One precise throw or thrust of a well-made spear can end an animal's life in less than a minute. Contrast this with how long it can take some predators to dispatch their prey. It can take hours for wolves to take down a bison. Even more precise killers such as lions can take up to 30 minutes to suffocate large prey. Spears gave us a way to penetrate directly to the vital organs. Other predators simply do not have this ability. By around 300,000 years ago, both modern humans and Neanderthals started to create points using the Lebois technique. These points were made with one strike from a prepared core. This would make a point that has a very sharp edge but was not symmetrical and often has a prominent bulb of percussion. Though these tools look quite primitive, they were razor sharp and certainly deadly. Sapiens and Neanderthals alike would use these points for hundreds of thousands of years. New napping techniques by both sapiens and Neanderthals would eventually see the development of finely flaked bifacial tools. A particular stone point found in Germany dating to 65,000 years ago changed how we thought about Neanderthal spear points. It is bifacial and napped with...
Dang it.
At Marshalls, our buyers spend every day hustling.
It is bifacial and napped with skill. It is important to note this tool was probably used on multiple animals before finally being discarded. We can imagine that when this tool was originally created, it would have been much more refined. This spear tip resembles what the Neanderthal point may have originally looked like, although this point may be a little more refined. Napping techniques would continue to advance around the world during the late Pleistocene. Many cultures made unique points in very advanced ways. Some of the earliest Europeans, known as the Auric nations, made composite microlith technology. Spears and other projectiles were tipped with multiple flakes of sharp stone. This was much easier to nap than a single point. It also made it easier to reuse the same wooden shafts. During a time when quality wood was not very common, being able to reuse shafts was very important. Aurignacian hunters also frequently used long and sharp bone spear points. Overall, the Aurignacian industry was creative but lacked more refined napping techniques. The later Solutrean industry of Europe would produce some of the finest points in archaeology. Some are very large, thin, and show a high degree of workmanship. The larger points were likely attached to thrusting spears, while other smaller points were used for atlatls, throwing spears, and arrows. Cultures around the world created advanced points, but the Americas are home to some of the most advanced points. You may have heard of Clovis points before. They are fluted projectiles created over the span of only about 600 years, mainly in North America. These points are truly exceptional. They are famous for their size and fluted base. Making the point is hard enough, but fluting is another level of complexity. To try to make these flutes, you risk the entire piece. A friend of mine created some Clovis points for an upcoming project, and I made sure he also sent me the points that had broken during the fluting process. Breaking a point this close to completion is extremely frustrating, so why risk it? The flutes provided a concave area which was very important for hafting. As you can see, the wooden haft can become almost flush with the point. This would provide the spear or atlatl with much greater penetration. Clovis points would only be made for about 600 years before subpopulations diversified their tool production. Some took to making even more complex points. Cumberland points are examples of post-Clovis excellence. The flutes often span the entirety of the blade. This level of complexity was certainly not necessary, but effective. Agate Basin, Eden, Folsom, and Dalton points are all very impressive. Zeeflick Dalton points are widely considered some of the finest points in archaeology. Since the Americas remained relatively in the Stone Age much longer than other parts of the world, they were able to truly develop their tools. So far we have only talked about spears and throwing spears. Now let's talk about the other weapons of the Stone Age. The bow is by far one of the best weapons of the Stone Age. They are also one of the oldest. The bow is thought to have been invented by our ancestors in Africa over 60,000 years ago. The bow provides a number of benefits that are just unmatched. Spears and even spear throwers are just slow compared to the bow. This gives prey more of an opportunity to react. A deer or boar can easily move out of the way of these projectiles before they hit them. It is still hard, but a lot easier with a bow. A faster projectile provides arrows with a lot of penetration. An arrow with a stone tip can easily penetrate both sides of a deer. The bow can also be fired from concealment. Spears either have to be thrown with an exaggerated movement or stabbed at close range. Another aspect of the bow is how fast you can get another arrow down range. Sure, you can always carry more spears, but they get rather cumbersome. As much as 30 arrows can be carried with ease. These aspects make the bow a very versatile weapon. You could hunt a few rabbits in the morning and then take a rhino in the evening. It was certainly a game changer for our ancestors. The next major advancement in weapons technology was the atlatl. The atlatl or spear thrower is a relatively simple concept. It is a lever that gives you more leverage when throwing a spear. This lets you throw projectiles farther and faster. Atlatls were once used all over the world. They were invented around 17,000 years ago, but could have been used much earlier. A question many of you may have been wondering is why would a culture decide to use the atlatl over the bow? They are slower and generally less accurate. The reason cultures chose the atlatl is generally explained by a need for power. Many primitive bows were not very powerful. This was often due to a lack of bow-making skill or availability of quality wood. These bows would have been fine for most animals, but mammoth and mastodon can be a different story. The atlatl can carry a larger projectile and exert more force than a stick bow. Another advantage to the atlatl is its relative simplicity. Bows are very challenging to make, and it is time-consuming to produce a lot of arrows. The atlatl, on the other hand, is basically just a stick with a hook. The darts are larger than arrows, but often much simpler. In the archaeological record, many atlatls are correlated with large game hunting cultures. The Clovis in particular were proficient atlatl users. There is evidence that the Clovis hunted mammoth, mastodon, bison, as well as many other species. Sometimes people doubt ancient cultures' ability to take down an animal as large as a mammoth. But even a mammoth only has so much blood. A few atlatl throws to the vitals and a mammoth will certainly die. It's just not a survivable wound. Even if it takes 30 minutes or a few hours, its organs will fail, its blood will spew out, and more spears can always be thrown. It was once thought that atlatls were just thrown towards prey in a volley in a hope one would find its mark. Now it is generally known that they were accurate weapons capable of precise shots. They were magnificent weapons of prehistory that are not always given the respect they deserve. Another later Paleolithic weapon that I guess was more of a tool was the axe. Basically a stone blade attached to a wooden handle. Some of the stones were knapped to form a sharp point, and Neolithic axes were also polished. Polished axes take hundreds of hours to create, but are much more effective than an axe that is only knapped. These tools would have been mainly used to cut down trees and work wood. You could imagine some would have been used as weapons from time to time. Another tool common in many Stone Age societies was the adze, a tool with a stone blade that was often used to work wood or for agriculture. They too could have been used as a weapon. Another classic weapon that cavemen are often depicted with is the club. Funny enough, this may be more of a stereotype than a reflection of reality. We don't really have any evidence that early humans used clubs. Evidence of clubs would not appear until after the Pleistocene. The earliest evidence of a club is from the Copper Age, around 5,500 years ago. The reason clubs were not common in prehistory is because they are generally weapons of war. During the Pleistocene and even much of the Neolithic, there were not many humans around. Hunter-gatherer populations were often few and far between. Conflicts certainly happened, but not as often as we might think. Even if a battle or war did occur, their hunting tools would do just fine. The Paleolithic may have actually been much more peaceful than we often think. Evidence of warfare would only start to occur towards the end of the Neolithic. Sites in Austria and Germany show as agriculture entered Central Europe, conflicts began to arise. The German site of Halberstadt shows evidence of the massacre of around 40 adult males. Most victims have evidence of blunt force trauma to the back of the head, perhaps made by clubs. This example attests to the notion that clubs only became common when a need for war arose. The grim nature of these ancient tragedies is one that would become also common throughout the history of the world. I will eventually make a very in-depth video on the nature of Stone Age violence. Anyways, clubs were also common in more recent Stone Age societies. The Maori and various other island peoples who had access to very dense woods often made deadly war clubs. Native Americans created various clubs, including some with a large stone on the end. This weapon on horseback was a very deadly combination. Clubs were very effective close-range weapons when cultures lacked metal blades. When metal was introduced into these societies, clubs were often replaced by spears, swords, and axes. Another classic weapon that many do not often associate with the Stone Age would be the knife. Knives have been used for a very long time.
Good, good. And his eyes? You see his eyelashes too?
Even a sharp piece of stone can be considered a knife. In the Upper Paleolithic, more complicated stone knives appeared. Perhaps one of the best examples of a Stone Age knife comes from Ötzi the Iceman. His knife was made of chert and had a wooden blade. This style of knife was relatively common throughout many cultures. It is really fascinating that the handle survived, as this is not the case with the majority of our finds. By far the best knives of the Stone Age, and unanimously the finest examples of flint knapping, are the Danish daggers. These daggers were masterfully made in the northern regions of Europe towards the end of the Stone Age. There are many variations of these daggers. Type 1 and Type 2 daggers are relatively simple. Basically just large stone blades. Type 3 and Type 4 daggers are the best. The Hindskevel Type 4 dagger is widely considered the most beautiful flint-knapped object ever made. It is made of a vivid red flint that is just awe-inspiring. Imagine how proud the maker of this dagger was after the last flake was taken off. Type 4 daggers such as this one feature a wide handle with a stitching style of flaking. This stitching was likely influenced by the influx of bronze daggers into the region at the end of the Stone Age. One thing you should understand about the Stone Age is that it did not end everywhere at the same time. Bronze and copper technology slowly made its way across Europe for hundreds of years. The remote regions of Scandinavia were some of the last in Europe to acquire this technology. Even after bronze became available, these daggers were made for hundreds of years. Some knappers even took it a step further to create stone short swords or very large daggers. Some of these weapons could be over 40 centimeters or 16 inches in length. One of these daggers even imitates an ornamental curved sword. I think the most impressive example is a composite flint sword. The design closely copies a bronze sword. It is assumed that the weapon had a piece of wood to hold it all together. Not only was it beautiful, but it would have been very deadly. I like to imagine that the extremely skillful knappers of these regions were reluctant to accept this new technology. They may have copied the stitching out of spite, as if, hey, I can do that too. Perhaps they were the Luddites of their day. Whatever the case, bronze is superior in a number of ways, and these daggers would eventually go out of fashion. Other cultures also made large knives. The Caddoan Mississippian culture made very wide and thin blades. The most famous example is the Sweetwater biface. It is very long and very wide, all while being very thin as well. I am aware not all of you are very familiar with how flint knapping works, but basically a lot of the goal is to thin the piece without breaking it or losing too much material. So it is insane that this biface is so thin while being so wide. Modern flint knappers have made bifaces this thin, but not nearly as wide. The person who made this tool was truly a master, likely better than any contemporary napper. So far I have covered the weapons and/or tools that were the most important to Stone Age people around the world. Next I will more briefly talk about some niche weapons and hunting tools. Throwing sticks were very important to some Stone Age people. At the aforementioned Shawnigan site, along with spears, a throwing stick was also discovered. The object was made with stone tools to be smooth and flat on one side. The artifact preserves impact fractures and damage consistent with that found on ethnographic and experimental examples of throwing sticks. When thrown, these sticks would have flown through the air in an accurate and straight line. These sticks are effective at killing small game, including waterfowl and even driving large game. Australian Aboriginals famously used throwing sticks called boomerangs to hunt all sorts of animals. Animals as large as kangaroos can be killed with a single throw. And no, real boomerangs do not come back. Another perhaps more recent invention is the blow dart. We really do not know when it was invented, but it was present in many societies long before metal made its way there. Blow darts are great weapons for taking down small game. They are extremely quiet and the projectile moves quite fast. The projectiles are also very easy and fast to create. Some, such as the Maya, even use seeds or clay balls as projectiles for birds and small mammals. The Cherokee mainly used them as a form of pest control. Some even use poison darts for larger game such as monkeys. This weapon is very good at killing small game, but generally lacks the power required to hunt larger game. Harpoons were very effective hunting tools in the Stone Age. They are essentially a subcategory of spears with barbs on the tip. Our oldest example is around 90,000 years old from the Republic of the Congo. It is thought the spear was made to spear giant catfish weighing as much as 69 kilograms or 150 pounds. All around the world, harpoons were made out of wood, stone, and often bone. Some of the most interesting harpoon designs I have found are the ones made by the Thule culture. The Thule culture were the ancestors of the modern Inuit. They often hunted seals and even walruses with harpoons. Their harpoons were made of stone, 2 types of bone, and wood. The weapon could be thrown or stabbed into an animal where then the tip would come loose and the hunter could pull the animal in with the line. This system was not only very effective, but also quite beautiful in my opinion. Another Stone Age weapon or tool was the bola. Bolas have been used in many cultures around the world. They essentially consist of stones at the ends of cordage. This device is thrown through the air to trip animals or people. It is most effective against large birds or animals with only 2 legs, since they are easier to trip. It is also effective on other animals even as large as a guanaco. Bolas could have been used as early as the Middle Paleolithic, though it is hard to tell if round stones can be interpreted as bolas since cordage often leaves no trace.
Can I get your help real fast, please? Quit. Please?
All right.